Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Somewhat Scholarly Podcast. Today I have with me Mr. Matt Hamilton. How are you, sir?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. I am great. And we can already tell by your voice that you're coming from the United Kingdom.
I am indeed from Bristol in the southwest of the UK.
Nice, nice. And how are things going nowadays? We are in the middle of May 2020, and the Bitcoin halving has taken place a couple days ago.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I know, most of the world is still in lockdown.
Yep.
And so how are things in your part of the world?
We're kind of in lockdown here. Our government is basically saying a whole load of contradictory stuff and can't seem to make their mind up as to what advice they're trying to give at the moment. So supposedly this week they're starting to come out of lockdown, which I think is not the best of plans right now. But yeah, we've been kind of pretty much in lockdown for the past few weeks, I guess. I've been pretty much isolated for the past, 6 or 8 weeks, because right at the start there was a potential risk that I might have come in contact with somebody at a conference who tested positive. So I've been isolating. Unfortunately, my wife caught COVID-19 and had quite a high fever and some breathing difficulties, luckily not bad enough to warrant medical attention, but it's taken a good 3 or 4 weeks for her to get over that, and she's just kind of getting around now. So yeah, it's a weird time at the moment. It's a weird time. Kids are homeschooling, so yeah, I'm used to working from home because I work from home quite a lot. But working from home and having my daughter at home as well and looking after her, and then my wife being ill and everything. So it's certainly a bit of a strange time right now.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like everyone is adjusting. Even the people who are used to working from home, their lives aren't the same. So.
Oh, exactly. It's like I worked from home for several years, and that's very different when you're still, I don't know, picking your kids up from school or getting breakfast into school in the morning or whatever it might be. At the weekend, you go out and do something. There's kind of like all these little tiny hints as to what day it is kind of disappear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it makes sense to transition to your professional background. I know you are a developer and a coder, but I don't know much about you because you and I just met a week ago in the Twitter sphere.
Yep.
So we're just sort of getting to know each other. So why don't you sort of introduce yourself to everyone and talk about your professional background?
Sure. So like you say, I'm a developer originally by background. I currently work for IBM, and I'm what's called a developer advocate. So it's my job to talk to other developers about what tools they want and how they're using them, and help educate them on technology in general and some of the stuff that IBM does. And I've only recently moved into that role about 3 months ago. For 2 years before then, I was working on the infrastructure team at IBM in the IBM cloud databases. So working on Postgres, Redis, etcd, various open source databases running in the cloud. Before then, I worked for a startup based in the US for 3 years that were making a health and fitness and nutrition tracking app, and I was leading their mobile development team. And then for about 15 years before then, I ran a web development agency here in Bristol. Did a lot of Python development, building intranets mainly for large corporations. So yeah, various different things.
Yeah, very cool. Very broad background. Yeah. So interesting. So our conversation on Twitter revolved around cryptocurrencies, XRP, Ripple, and Bitcoin, BTC. Yeah. So how did you get into cryptocurrencies, and how much time do you spend with them nowadays?
Right. So when I mentioned I ran a web development agency, and one of the guys who worked for me, a guy called Scott, was very much into cryptocurrencies at the time. I'd kind of seen Bitcoin and had a bit of a play around with it, but kind of, I disregarded it and thought, well, hey, nothing's going to come of this. I've been doing stuff like the folding at home and SETI at home type projects. So I was used to having CPUs, running away, whirring away, doing things. But I was like, this is Mickey Mouse money. Nothing's going to come of this. So I ignored it at the time. much obviously to my, no doubt regret now. But this friend of mine, the guy who worked with me, Scott, he got heavily into it and was like running mining equipment and buying bigger and bigger mining, ASIC equipment. And he was running it in the office. And as a kind of a thank you for, us letting him run it during work time, he gave me, he got out of Bitcoin and got into XRP. And that was my introduction to XRP. He basically realized that there was no way he could keep profitably mining because the difficulty level was just getting harder and harder, and ASICs were getting faster and faster. And he was waiting like several months for some ASICs he'd ordered from China that got held up in customs. And, by the time they turned up, and as a thank you, he gave me a bunch of XRP. And that's kind of what got me into it. So when I was then working for this startup in the US, and then when they, unfortunately, they ran out of money and suddenly stopped, and I was looking to kind of, brush up on my skills, and I tried to write a trading bot just as, a exercise, programming exercise. Can I write something that can buy and sell? I knew nothing about finance at the time. I knew nothing really about cryptocurrencies, and just gave it a go. And lo and behold, it started to make money. And I was like, okay, cool. And this was like mid 2017. And then there was the big run up in whenever it was September or so, 2017. And this thing was doing really, really, really well, to the point where I'm like, I don't need a job. I'm just gonna sit here and let these things earn me money. And they were earning, quite considerable amount of money, more than I was going to be earning, doing a proper job, right?
Right.
And then, my wife said, well, yeah, but then you're just going to sit around at home all day in your underpants and do nothing. So you should go out and get a job anyway. So I started looking around, and of course the market all came crashing down. And I got a job at IBM and started doing that. So I was working at IBM, and then I was still doing the trading bots kind of in the evening. And actually I did a course at Oxford University on fintech, because in parallel to the idea of starting with IBM, I was also looking at starting up our own fintech company, myself and a former colleague. And we built a prototype that could allow you to send us a standard UK domestic bank transfer, and you would get XRP come out the other end of it. And it took about 10 seconds. You would hit the button, hit transfer, and XRP would be in your wallet in about 10 seconds time. And the idea behind that was to build like plumbing that you could then use for other services. So if you wanted to build a online game and you needed some in-game currency system or something, then you could use this as a way of topping up the in-game currency or something. But the problem is that none of the banks wanted to go anywhere near it. I called up like 7 or 8 banks, and they had to be banks that were on the UK faster payment network, which at the time there was only about less than 10, I think. It's expanded a bit now, but I contacted them, and they were like, oh, we don't do Bitcoin. And I was like, no, this is not Bitcoin. This is XRP. This is something different. Yeah, we don't do that. And, I had one bank manager threaten to close down my personal account if I kept trying. I had another one that said to me, we don't deal in Bitcoin, porn, or gambling. And I was like, okay, fine. It's none of those. But yeah, there was just no appetite from the banks to do this kind of thing. So we kind of shelved the idea. And then, like I said, I started working at IBM, and that kind of got put on the back burner, that idea.
Wow, very interesting. So maybe it's worth clarifying the distinction between what Bitcoin does and what XRP does, because you mentioned the whole bank-to-bank type of settlement, and it is very, very fast, unlike Bitcoin, which goes around the banks and is very slow. So these are very different technologies with very, very different purposes. So can you go a little bit deeper on what XRP is and what the problems are that it tries to solve?
Sure. I think it's a bit of a common misconception when people think of XRP and banks together, right? XRP has got nothing to do with banks in and of itself, right? And originally the point of XRP was created by, a couple of Bitcoiners that didn't like the speed at which Bitcoin ran and were concerned about the energy consumption that Bitcoin took. And so they wanted to create something that was kind of like Bitcoin, but more efficient, right? And that's what XRP is. It's a currency. We can use it in exactly the same way as we can do Bitcoin. We can send stuff backwards and forwards to each other. No banks involved at all, right? It has nothing to do with banks. Then the creators of XRP gave a bunch of it to a company called Ripple, and they were then trying to work out, okay, what do they do with it? Now, Ripple started off originally in, again, building a person-to-person app. They had this fantastic, really nice thing called Ripple Trade, and it was a wallet that allowed you to transfer not just cryptocurrencies, but fiat currencies. And so I could send pound sterling and you would receive US dollars, but completely without any need for banks or anything. It was just complete peer-to-peer, person-to-person. And then the problem was at the time then, because they kind of stuck their head up above the parapet, they were like the second cryptocurrency, really, right? And they weren't anonymous like Satoshi Nakamoto, right? And the US authorities started to have a go at them, and so they got fined by FinCEN and told that they couldn't deal with consumers anymore. So they kind of pivoted and started looking at, okay, well, how do we do something different? And so they thought, well, okay, at the moment, the main way consumers send money backwards and forwards is via banks and money transfer services. So rather than try to get people to use cryptocurrencies directly, how about we fit into the back end of these systems, and then people don't have to change the way that they work, right? They don't have to change the systems they use. They don't have to worry about this strange, magic beans on the internet that they're using, right? They can just transfer. I can send pounds sterling. You can get US dollars or whatever, wherever you are, and that's what it is. So XRP and Bitcoin basically do the same thing, right? On a technological basis, they do the same thing. They're both means of doing peer-to-peer transfer of value without any intermediary, right? There's no central authority in the XRP ledger network, just the same way there's no central authority in Bitcoin. So I think the main confusion being is that because Ripple are very well known, and they're very vocal, and they themselves are working with banks, that people associate XRP itself with banks. But that's making that connection would be like saying, okay, well, Backed are doing bank stuff with Bitcoin, so that means Bitcoin's a banker coin, right? No, it's not. It's just one company doing it, and so that's the thing. But I think it's a common misconception that people associate XRP with banks. And actually, if you look at Ripple, their original CEO, Chris Larsen, he made his name with a peer-to-peer lending system called Prosper. And Prosper, the whole idea of Prosper was to allow two people to do peer-to-peer lending without banks, right? And he ended up going toe-to-toe with the SEC over that because he was trying to cut banks out. And the original, if you go right back before Ripple as we know it, there was an original project called Ripple Pay before Bitcoin even existed. And Ripple Pay, their slogan was "Be your own banker," right? So, Ripple has this kind of history of peer-to-peerness in it, but people I think people who are new to cryptocurrencies kind of get told that XRP and Ripple are bad because they're dealing with banks, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, if Ripple is successful, then they actually reduce the power that banks have, because they create a level playing field in which, I have exactly the same ability to transfer value as, some big bank does. And it makes no difference.
Yeah, that brings up a few interesting points. So I guess maybe one, we should just clarify for any listeners who don't know, XRP is the coin itself, and Ripple is a company.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, myself included, but a ton of people say the coin Ripple, blah, blah, blah. But technically it's different, right?
Yeah, technically it's different. Now, in the early days, the terms were used interchangeably because there wasn't really any reason to distinguish them. And the network itself was also called Ripple, and the project before Ripple, the company, was called Ripple, right? So the project existed and was called Ripple before Ripple, the company, existed. And the Ripple, the company, was originally called OpenCoin, and they then changed their name to Ripple, which, you know, if I had a time machine, I'd go back and slap somebody and say that's a stupid idea. But it's a common thing that happens in technology all the time. You know, there's a search engine called Elasticsearch and a company called Elastic, right, that maintain it. Now, you know, they don't own it. It's an open source bit of software, but they just happen to have the same name. You know, databases, Oracle's a company, Oracle's also a product, right? This is not an uncommon thing within technology, but I think there's a lot of people that kind of like to make a big deal out of it within the cryptocurrency thing when, you know, they're like, oh, well, so-and-so once upon a time called it Ripple and not XRP, so they're trying to cover something up. And, you know, it's like, nobody cared back then. It was a different world. You know, you're trying to look at things now with the lens back then when cryptocurrencies didn't really exist. This strange thing called Bitcoin was very nascent at the time and, you know, less than $1. And what people were doing, they didn't even know whether it was legal, whether they're going to end up in jail creating this thing or not. So, you know, they created what they created. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I'm starting to pay more and more attention to what things are called and just like the names that are chosen for companies and products. And it's just interesting. I guess I'll just leave it at that. But maybe we should talk about the differences in the Bitcoin network versus the XRP network in terms of the ledger and consensus and the idea of a blockchain, and how are the two different, and therefore how is Ripple or XRP able to achieve transactions that are so much faster than Bitcoin? I mean, 1,000 or more times faster.
Yeah.
So how is that possible?
Okay, so there's if we break it down into kind of two components here with a blockchain, right? You've got the literal bit of the blockchain, that is a chain of blocks, a chain of records in which each block, and in the XRP ledger they're called ledgers rather than blocks, but they're roughly the same thing, right? Each block is a group of transactions, and then each block is signed with a digital signature. And then that digital signature is included in the next block. And then the block of that is, you know, the signature is included in the next block. And you get this chain, which means that there's no way you can alter any piece of information in that chain without invalidating all of the signatures of the entire chain. Now, that's the basics of a blockchain, and that is exactly the same in XRP as it is with Bitcoin, right? Both of them do the same thing in that regards. There's a slight difference in that Bitcoin uses a model called UTXO, in which it's what's called momentum accounting, triple entry accounting. So within the Bitcoin, you're keeping, the analogy is within Bitcoin, you're keeping the receipts of payments, you're not keeping the balances of payments, right? So in XRP, you would say, okay, I've got $50, let's say, or 50 XRP, 50 shekels, whatever it is, right? I've got 50 units of currency, and if I spend one of those, I now record in my ledger that I have 49. And if I spend another one, I cross it out, and I now record in my ledger I have 48, right? So at any point in time when I look at the ledger, I know exactly what my current balance is. Bitcoin does it differently. Bitcoin records the receipts. So it says, okay, you had a deposit of 50, you then spent one, you then spent another one. And then at any point in time, I can add those all up to get the balance, but I don't ever record the balance itself. All I record is the transactions that would lead up to that balance, right? Now, this is actually significant because in each block in Bitcoin, you're storing, like I said, these receipts. So if you were missing one of them, then your end balance would be incorrect. If you were missing a payment that said, okay, I paid you $5. Now, if that block is missing, then suddenly it looks like you've got $5 more because you don't have that receipt. You've spent $5. With the XRP ledger, it stores the complete balance in each block. So it says I had $50, I had $49, I had $48. So if you lose a block, then all you lose is the ability, the information of what was held at that time. But the current block is still correct, right? It still says I have $48 or whatever it is. So they store the information in different ways, and that has pros and cons. It's more efficient in terms of Bitcoin, in terms of storage, because you're not storing everything in every block. You're just storing, these are the transactions that have happened in this block. And if I add all of these transactions together, going right the way back through the blockchain, back to block 0, I will have complete state. Within XRP, it stores a complete state in each ledger. So each ledger is much larger, but I don't need the full history in order to synchronize and start being useful, right? So that's why you see some people refer to the XRP ledger as being 8 terabytes or something and being too big for anybody to synchronize. That's only if you contain the complete history, but you don't need that complete history. You just need the current, like, few ledgers to say, okay, what is the current state? And because you've got the hash and the hash agrees with everybody else, then you know that nothing has been, tampered with, right? So whereas with Bitcoin, you need to get the entire blockchain before you can synchronize and say, okay, I know what the current balance of my wallet is right at this moment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's an engineering trade-off between the two, right? One of them is easier to store, the other is easier to process. The next stage, so that's kind of like the how we store the information. And the next bit is, how do you solve what's called the double spend problem? So the double spend problem is, if I have my wallet and in that wallet I have $5, I take that $5 out, I give it to you, I no longer have $5 in my wallet. I can't now give $5 to somebody else because I've given it to you. Now, in a digital world in which money is just a representation of ones and zeros, I can copy that $5 and give it to many people. So I could give the same $5 to you, I could give the same $5 to my wife, I could give the same $5 to my neighbor. And of course, that would not work. That would have no, monetary bearing, because you'd break everything, because you could just infinitely copy money. So you need to have a way of recording what has happened. Now, in a centralized system like a bank, you've got a central database. And when you go into one store and you make a payment with a debit card or something, right? It contacts that bank and goes, does this amount of money exist on this card? Yes. Okay, I make the transaction. You go into the next store, it goes, sorry, you're out of money now, because it knows it's checked the same database and you've got this central database that has a record. If you try and do it in a decentralized manner, like you do with Bitcoin and XRP, how do you ensure that I don't make the same transaction at exactly the same time in 2 different places and spend it at the same time, right? If we can say I can't do it at the same time, then it can become easier, because the information can propagate through the network, and you can say, okay, I made that transaction there, and eventually everybody will know that. But the problem being is, what if I do it at the same time or within some short period of time, when the network, not all the nodes on the network know the same information, right? And that's where Bitcoin and XRP are very substantially different in the way they solve that. So with Bitcoin, you have this concept of proof of work, and the idea being is that you have miners try and solve effectively a mathematical problem, right? That they're doing. Somebody described it as just like trying to do as many Sudoku as fast as you can, right? And whoever gets, you have a room full of people, you give them all the Sudoku card and they all fill it in, and whoever gets the first one, they get to make the choice, right? They're the leader, right? But only one of them can complete it first, and it's very quick. It's hard to complete, but once it's completed, it's very easy to check, right? So it's very easy to verify that that's the correct one. And so with proof of work and with mining, you have this process by which everybody tries to solve this problem, and starts building upon the chain with their proof of work. And eventually, when they join together, you can kind of compare and say, okay, who's done the most work? And whoever's done the most work, that's the chain we say, that's the one that we say is the true occurrence, the true state of things. And when we disregard the smaller chain. With XRP, it does it differently in that it actually tries to agree with a whole bunch of nodes kind of there and then, right, in the time. So if you're trying to work out how to solve the double spend problem, if everybody can agree the order in which the transactions happened in, then it becomes a simple problem, because you can say the first transaction is valid, the second one is invalid, right? You've spent your money, you can't spend it again. Now, the beauty is that you don't have to know, you don't really care what order the transactions are in. All you care is that we all agree on the order, right? So what the XRP Ledger Consensus Protocol does is you ask effectively a subset of the network, okay, what do you think the order should be? And you vote on it, right? And they all come back and they say, okay, we think the order should be A, B, C, D, right? And if 80% of them agree it should be A, B, C, D, you go, okay, that's the order, and we're going to go with that's the order the transactions happened in. And it doesn't matter if one particular node goes, well, it was A, B, D, C, because you can kind of ignore them if they're lower than, like I said, you need 80% agreement. And there's no reason for somebody to lie, because you don't really care, like I said, what the order is. You just kind of care that they come to an agreement. So there's nothing to win here. So there's no incentive to try and game the system, because everybody who's honest wants the system to just work. Anybody who's dishonest is going to be in the minority, because in a decentralized system, basically you do what the majority want to do. So the minority, all they can do is constantly disagree, right? And so whenever you say A, B, C, D, they go, no, I'm going to say it's D, C, B, A, right? And if they just keep disagreeing, all you do is just ignore them, right? Because you know that they're being malicious, because there's no reason for them to disagree.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point, because on the Bitcoin blockchain, the incentive to produce blocks, the incentive to be a miner, is that you get newly created Bitcoins,
yeah,
which have value, of course, on the blockchain. But
yep.
in the XRP ecosystem, what do you get for producing a block, or for agreeing, or being in the 80%, or being in the 20%?
Nothing. There's no directive incentive there. Now that works. That's a pro and a con in the situation here. Now, with Bitcoin, you need that incentive there, because people are burning power, right? They've got electricity bills to pay, so they need to be incentivized, okay, to buy electricity, to set up these big, mining farms, to leave their computer running overnight, whatever it might be. You need to incentivize them to do that. Otherwise, they're not going to do it, because they're just going to end up with an electricity bill at the end. With the XRP ledger, because you don't have this proof of work process, you just have this kind of voting agreement. You don't require so much electrical consumption. So because of that, you don't need to incentivize people in order to pay their electricity bill, because their expenses are no higher than running, typically at any other kind of server, a mail server, whatever, right? So generally, the people that run nodes on the XRP ledger, their incentive is they have a reason to run a node, right? So they run an exchange, and they want to be able to check that the transactions are coming in are legitimate, or they want, because it's a decentralized system, if you want to submit a transaction to the network, the only way to do that and verify you can do that is to run your own node, right? Same as on XRP, same as on Bitcoin. If you don't run your own node, you're trusting somebody else to run a node, right? So, your incentive is the same as people who run Bitcoin full nodes, and that is that you want a healthy network, you want a strong network, you run a business that uses the facilities of the network. So that's where you run it.
Yeah, so maybe it's worth clarifying, on the Bitcoin network, there are actually two large types of two categories of people. You can be a block producer, a miner, but you can also run just a full node, where you watch all the transactions and you validate them one at a time, and propagate them to the network.
Exactly, and full nodes are not incentivized, right? Full nodes don't get any reward. They do that for their either altruistic reasons, or they want to verify the network, or they want the network to be strong. And that's the same with nodes on the XRP network as well.
Yeah. So one thing I don't know about XRP is how do you become a block producer? Is it totally voluntary, or is there what's the process for determining those people?
Anybody can do it, right? So anybody can run what's called a validator node, right? There's effectively two types of nodes on the XRP ledger network. What's sometimes called a stock node or a regular node, and then a validator node. And the only difference between them is that a validator basically publishes its votes, but they do exactly the same thing, right? Validator is a slight misnomer and slightly confusing term for it, because all nodes validate every single transaction regardless, right? They all ensure that the transaction is well formed, it is correct, it is the right addressing on it, it is, adheres to the protocol of the network, et cetera, et cetera. Every node does that anyway. The only thing the validators do is they vote on the order of transactions for that three or 4 second block, because each block, each ledger is only open for 3 or 4 seconds. And that's what they're doing. They're just saying, okay, for this 3 or 4 seconds, for this, whatever, 30, 100, 300, whatever it is, transactions, 3,000 transactions that come in that time, this is the order in which we agree that they will be applied, and everybody then applies in that order. Now, anybody can run a validator. There's no checks, there's no whatever. The thing being is that when you run a validator, you're publishing your votes effectively on what the order should be. You don't know who is listening to what you are doing, right? You could effectively be doing there and just shouting into the void and nobody's listening, right? You could be contributing nothing at all. You don't actually know. There's no way to know who is actually listening to your validator. And each node configures which validators they listen to in what's called a UNL, a unique node list. And that all that is just a list of nodes in which you say, okay, this is a series of nodes that I will listen to come to consensus on the transactions, right?
Interesting. So that UNL, the unique node list, that is something that each node comes up with for itself and keeps secret, so no one knows what other people's lists are?
They can do, right? There's different ways in which it can be done. Now, for kind of convenience in a way, and simplicity, and to help bootstrap the network to start with, Ripple publish a UNL. Well, they didn't actually originally. You had to configure it manually, but nowadays they publish a UNL, and you can subscribe to that if you want, and use that in the same way that Bitcoin Core has within the code a series, some seed nodes that are pre-configured, and you can choose to use them or you can choose not to use them. The only criteria is that you have to have a minimum overlap in your list as to the other lists on the network that are used on the network, right? So you have to have at least sort of 80%, I think it is, overlap with the other lists on the network. But that's no different than saying that in order to use Bitcoin, you have to agree on this particular hash algorithm or whatever, right? If you want to participate, you have to have a certain amount of agreement on what protocol parameters you're going to use. And with XRP, it's okay, we agree that we're going to have a minimum overlap on the UNLs.
That makes sense. So just kind of shifting the conversation slightly to the overall big picture. XRP has been around a lot of years. I forget what year it was launched. Do you happen to know?
2011? 2012? Yeah, end of 2011. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's got a lot of years under its belt, and I think it's still it's definitely in the top 5. I think it's the number 3 cryptocurrency by market cap. Why do you think that it hasn't overtaken Bitcoin, let's say, as number 1? Or what do you think are the barriers to adoption and acceptance, maybe relative to Bitcoin, but also overall?
Well, that's an interesting one, because when people talk about market cap, market cap doesn't sort of mean much in cryptocurrencies. It's the last price that something was sold at multiplied by however many there are, right, in circulation. Now, then you get the question of, well, how do you define circulation, right? Now, all of the XRP, one of the differences between XRP and Bitcoin is that with XRP, all of them were created right at the start. There's 100 billion of them. They were created at the start, and the founders of the ledger chose how to distribute them, right? And they gave 80% of them to this company, Ripple. They kept 20% of them between themselves, right? Now, some people have a big issue with that. Maybe we can get into that later about, what they call term of pre-mine. But if you look at, okay, well, how many XRP there are? There's 100 billion XRP. So the market cap, if you're comparing like with like, pretty much, there's 100 billion times whatever the current price of XRP is, 20 cents or something at the moment, 20, 21 cents, right? XRP has surpassed Bitcoin several times in the past in terms of market cap. But some people choose to calculate the market cap as saying, okay, just the XRP that is not owned by one particular company, Ripple, right? And that then gets into the hairy situation of, well, if you don't count Ripple's XRP, do you count Satoshi's Bitcoin? Do you count the Bitcoin from the Tulip Trust, if that should exist, for example? Do you count, Grayscale's 1% of Bitcoin that they own, or whatever it is, right? Where do you kind of draw the line in this? And some people say, well, okay, well, XRP, Ripple's XRP is in escrow, right? That's a cryptographic escrow run by the network itself that is beyond Ripple's reach, effectively, right? Once they put it in escrow, it comes back out once the time period has finished, and they're on like 5-year rolling contracts. So even if the feds turn up at Ripple's office with documentation, they can't release that escrow network as a whole, and Ripple only control about 1% of the network. So but that same kind of escrow process is exactly the same thing that's actually used by Lightning Network on Bitcoin, right? It's hash time locks. So if you were going to say, well, Ripple's XRP doesn't count, then by that same measure, you should probably say, well, all of the Bitcoin that people have locked up in Lightning channels shouldn't count. And if you kind of take this to the further conclusion where, let's say, Lightning is successful and everybody is transacting on Lightning, which is what some people think should happen with Bitcoin, then in theory, pretty much all of Bitcoin is going to be in a hash time lock at some point, owned by somebody, right? It's either in my channel, or it's your channel, or it's in somebody else's channel waiting to go somewhere. So what is the difference? I think when you start to break these things down, you realize kind of how absurd these comparisons are, because you can kind of cut it however you want, and you get the same sort of comparisons.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely agree with you that there's no clear-cut definition of any of these things, and even if there were, so what?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
what do you mean? People say, well, there's 100 billion XRP. Well, then there's only 21 million Bitcoin, in theory. Well, so what? Just move the decimal point, right?
Yeah.
You've got how many billion Satoshis? You've got how many, what is it, milli Bitcoin, milli Satoshi, millisats, whatever. I can't remember what they are. There's the next level down
right
that people are using on Lightning, right? So you can just keep moving the decimal point along, and it doesn't really make that much difference, right? Overall, it's like, okay, if you're looking at it from an investment point of view, okay, if I can buy one Bitcoin, or I can buy whatever, 10,000, 100,000 XRP, all I care about is, if it, from an investment point of view, what percentage has that increased over the amount of time I've held it, say. Now, as we know, the entire cryptocurrency market has gone up and down and up and down. XRP had a massive peak and did like 37,000% increase, in 2017, right? If you look at the price of XRP and the price of Bitcoin now versus their price 4 years ago, XRP has outperformed Bitcoin, right? Over the space of 4 years, it's outperformed Bitcoin. If you look at it over the space of 2 years, it's done really badly, right? Again, you can pick your time scale and come up with whatever answer you want, right? Some people are like, oh, but XRP's like dropped massively from its all-time high. What does that mean? Well, I would say, well, cool. That means it got to that price at one point. Maybe it could get there again, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if XRP went back up to its all-time high, that would be a case of going up, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 times. That'd be the equivalent of, if it got back up to its all-time high, that'd be the equivalent of Bitcoin would have to get up to whatever, 100,000 or something in order to, 150,000 in order to get that same kind of thing, that same kind of increase. So yeah, again, however you define it, however you pick your time, you get whatever answer you want, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no right way to do it. So
yeah,
that's another crazy thing about crypto is it's a whole new asset class. It really only has a decade of life, and everything is in the price discovery phase. So I mean, I think any coin that like actually solves a problem is going to go up in value a lot, and how much is a lot? No idea.
Exactly. Now Bitcoin is like the household name, right? If anybody's heard of cryptocurrencies, they've heard of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is the Scotch tape, the sellotape, the Hoover, the blue tack, the whatever you know, they are the, you know, the household name for cryptocurrencies. So Bitcoin is, and it, you know, it was the first one there, right? And none of these would have existed if it wasn't for Bitcoin in the first place. So Bitcoin's always going to have a lot of, you know, first mover advantage from that, and everybody's still going to know its name. So that alone is going to do it very well, regardless of how things go. So, you know, when people say, well, why isn't XRP doing so well? Well, you know, comparatively, still very few people have heard of it compared to have heard of Bitcoin. So when they think of cryptocurrencies, they think of Bitcoin. But and again, it comes as well. It comes down to the different approaches. I think a lot of people within the Bitcoin ecosystem are very much, okay, down with the banks. We're going to do. I mean, that's how Bitcoin started, right? The, you know, the wording in the first block, you know, 2008 financial crash, down with the banks. Let's do something different, right? Now, XRP enables you to do exactly the same thing, but many of the companies that are involved with XRP are, I would describe as a bit more pragmatic with things and saying, well, banks are always going to exist in some form or another. So let's try and work out a way in which we can make them more decentralized and get them on this blockchain rather than try to create something totally separate, right?
Yeah, that brings up a really interesting point, and we touched on it earlier, which is the involvement of banks in the XRP ecosystem, and that it's not a relationship that's there because of the code or because of anything explicit. It's just sort of maybe a strategic decision on the part of Ripple as a company. Is that
Exactly.
accurate? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing in XRP at all to do with banks, right? Nothing. You know, it like I said, XRP is pretty much identical to Bitcoin in terms of it just allows you to move value from one person to another without any intermediary, right? It just so happens that one of its biggest use cases is being championed by a company called Ripple, who happen to be trying to do it with banks. Now, they're in a bit of a catch-22. Well, they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? Because people go, oh, Ripple's used for banks, down with the banks, right? And then, you know, XRP is a bankster coin. And then you have some people going, well, the banks aren't using it and they don't need it, so they're not using it. So, and it's kind of like, well, you know, pick a side, guys, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of gets like hassle from both sides, and that some people think, well, it's evil because they dare talk to banks, and then the other people think, well, it's a failure because it's not got anywhere, right? Now Ripple are turning up to banks and saying, hey, look, we've got this better way of doing it. It uses this thing called XRP, and of course banks going, whoa, hold on, wait a minute, you know, we don't even know what this is, a new asset class, what are the laws around it, you know, we're talking stuff cross border, so are we talking the jurisdiction of this country or that country or, you know, whatever, right? So it's a Ripple have a tough sell in order to get XRP being used by the banks. Now Ripple were I think very smart with this, and they sent out, they originally set out to use XRP as a means for banks to be able to transfer value, right? But they realized that underneath this, the actual network they use, Swift, for interbank transfers, is so antiquated and so old and so unreliable and slow and opaque in terms of its messaging that you can't really put something like a digital asset, you know, XRP or Bitcoin or anything on top of that, because it's just, you know, it's just not suitable to do it, right? It's like trying to take a Ferrari and run it down a country lane. It's not going to work, right? You need to get a decent tarmac before you're going to put a, you know, a performance car down there, right? So Ripple started to say, hey, well, we got this thing called XRP, and then they realized, well, we've got to solve the next problem below that, right? They wanted to solve settlement, and they couldn't solve settlement until they solved payment. So they came out with this solution, what was termed Xcurrent, which is basically similar to Swift in that it's a messaging system. All it says is bank A pays bank B, right? But it does it in a more reliable way than Swift, because it does it in such a way that you can actually say, okay, give me the status of this payment as it's going on. Did it succeed? Did it not succeed? What was wrong? Whereas with Swift, you just kind of throw it into the ether and hope it gets there. And 4 days later, you call up and go, where's my bank transfer? It's not turned up yet, right? So Swift, Ripple started trying to solve this payments problem first. And they realized that, okay, if they can get like a relationship with all of these financial institutions and banks, then they can start setting the groundwork up and get all of the infrastructure in place. And then when cryptocurrencies are more widely accepted, they could say to them, hey, look, and now you can enable XRP, and you can not only do the payment messaging, but you can actually settle the transaction as well. And you don't need to have pre-funded pots of money at each end, which is how it's done at the moment, what are called Nostro and Vostro accounts. And you don't need to have parked money ahead of time at these different locations. And you don't even need to necessarily have trust, right? If you are the Bank of America and you're trying to transfer a payment to the Bank of Kazakhstan, you've got to have the banks have got to have a relationship there, because at some point they're saying, okay, we need you to hold on to this money for us, but it's our money, but we want you to just keep it in your vault so that when we make a payment, you can just, transfer it over, right? It's not necessarily as physical as that, but it's, metaphorical is the process. But you have to have that trusted relationship. Well, when you start bringing cryptocurrencies into it, you don't have to have the trust there, because you could say, hey, here's this XRP, here's this Bitcoin. Once they've got it, right? If they receive it, they receive it. That's settled, end of story. They've got the value there. There's no chargebacks, there's no, take backs. It's done. So the point being is Ripple can now start bringing XRP in kind of as banks and financial providers start to become more comfortable.
So Ripple tries to handle this settlement where banks or their customers are trying to move fiat around the world, let's say, yep. And then sort of on the back end, they're using XRP in these 3 to 4 second blocks, which is very quick. It's not really going to affect the exchange rate in such a short period of time. So XRP is sort of operating, I don't know the word for it. It's not as the primary currency, right? Like US dollars or British pounds or whatever. It's sort of happening as like behind the scenes. Whereas something like Bitcoin, when we send Bitcoin back and forth, I think it's thought about by most people as the currency itself.
Yeah.
Although of course you could convert your US dollars into Bitcoin, then send it, and then the person sells it into fiat. But there's huge exchange rate risk.
Right, but that happens all the time, right? If I wanted to send you some money now, like say we've just done something, right, and you say, okay, Matt, I want to pay you £100 or something, or I want to pay you $100, then I would look up the exchange rate and I go, okay, so it's this amount of Bitcoin, and I'll send you £100 worth of Bitcoin or $100 worth of Bitcoin, right? Now, what happens very slowly in that process, and it may have happened weeks ago or days ago, but at some point I take some pounds and I buy some Bitcoin and I send some Bitcoin to you. And at some point you sell that Bitcoin because you've got to pay your mortgage or your grocery bill or whatever, right? So that kind of process of converting from one fiat to say Bitcoin or XRP and back to another fiat is happening all the time anyway. Just people maybe not thinking it as the same way. So all Ripple are doing is making it a more automated process and sort of an industrial scale process in which banks can do this, and it can go through, instantly and it automatically. So, I give some US dollars at one end, and those US dollars get sent to an exchange. The exchange buys XRP. The XRP gets sent to an exchange in Mexico. The XRP gets sold for Mexican pesos, and then the Mexican pesos get sent to the destination bank account, and within the space of a minute, the full process has happened and the transaction happens. Now that's happening right now between the US and Mexico, and XRP is used on 10% of the entire remittance flow between the US and Mexico, right? This is billions and billions of dollars a month that's going on here. And this is happening right now. So 10% of all payments going between the USA and Mexico at all, right, are going through XRP. And nobody knows because it's behind the scenes, right? You can see it on the XRP ledger, you can see the transactions, and you can, people have done, some sleuthing work and worked out, from the timing of the transactions and stuff like that this is going on, and are able to record it. But for the end user who walks into a MoneyGram or whatever and says, I want to send this money home, they don't see, they don't realize. And the great thing being is that they don't have to know, right? So they're doing exactly what they did before, but hopefully a little bit cheaper and a little bit faster.
Yeah, that brings up a really important point that these things, XRP in particular, is happening on the back end. And in terms of cryptocurrency adoption, or really the adoption of any technology or product, the primary driver, at least as I look around the world, is need. And then the secondary driver of adoption is want. So, so a lot of people might even be using XRP without knowing it. It's just happening. It's just happening on the back end. So, how do you see that taking place as you look to the future about who is going to need XRP in terms of owning it themselves, understanding wallets and ledgers, versus Bitcoin versus any of these other cryptocurrencies?
Well, again, the answer for who's going to need XRP could be exactly the same as who's going to need Bitcoin, right? If you want some sort of, sovereign money that you can, is unconfiscatable, that I can transfer from here to there without an intermediate that can block it, et cetera, then XRP is a few people to anybody to everybody, right? And there's some people that think, okay, well, Bitcoin's going to become the world currency and everybody's going to use it. There's people that say that XRP is going to become the world currency, everybody's going to use it. Maybe that may happen one day. I think that will be a long way off for either of those scenarios to happen. But yeah, if people want a way to move value around, then that's one of the ways to do it. But there's also, it goes beyond this. So a lot of people focus on, say, what Ripple are doing and what banks are doing, but XRP is used for other things as well. So the main thing I use it for literally on a daily basis is for monetization of web content, right? So there's a company called Coil, and Coil was founded by a guy called Stefan Thomas, who was the guy that wrote the original What is Bitcoin video back in whenever that was, 2010 or something, 2009. He produced a video called What is Bitcoin? He wrote the Bitcoin JavaScript library. He then went on, he was the CTO at Ripple, and now he's working for this company called Coil that he set up. And Coil are looking to monetize the web. And the reason they're looking to do that is because the main way of monetizing content at the moment is through advertisements, right? Banner ads and the likes. And you've got this really nasty situation where the more an advertiser knows about you, the more valuable the advert is, right? Because if they know more about you, they know exactly what shampoo to sell you. They know what, things to offer you that you're going to want to buy. And the only way they can do that is if they know every single little thing about you. So they are incentivized to find out as much about you and collect as much personal information about you as possible in order to sell advertisements to you. Well, what if there was a different model? What if there was a model in which literally I can just start paying for content? Now, a lot of people are like, well, content should be free. Well, yeah, but you are paying for it. You're just paying for it through your personal information, right? And I've got no problem with say going to a newspaper website and paying them if it's a case of I can pay them whatever, half a cent per article I read, and I don't have to get my credit card out, right? And it just happens. And so that is what Coil are doing, and Coil are doing this right now. So if somebody goes along to my blog, for example, or my YouTube channel, and their browser is Coil enabled, then it will start paying me money, in the background as they are reading or as they are watching. And so every second they watch, I get whatever 1/10 of a cent or 1,000th of a cent or whatever it is, right? And that then completely gets rid of this model of advertising as a means of monetizing content. And you can directly tie the monetization to the actual consumption of the content. Like literally, I'm watching a video, and for every second of video I get, I'm paying a bit of payment. And as soon as I stop paying, I stop receiving. Or as soon as I stop receiving, I stop paying, right? And this goes on to this idea of the internet of value, right? And this is what, again, Ripple were very big in kind of pushing this notion that and they created a protocol called Interledger, which is now a W3C standard. So it's the same standards body that created the web as we know it today, all the protocols on the web as we know it today. And Interledger is a protocol that allows you to transfer value regardless of what cryptocurrency it is. And again, it could be a case of, I want to get paid in Bitcoin and you pay in US dollars, or I want to be paid in XRP and you pay in dollars. It doesn't matter. There's basically a network, and along that network are a number of exchange points that will exchange from one to another. So I just say, hey, give me, £100, and your browser just starts paying in US dollars, and it gets converted en route by various exchange points until it gets to me the amount of money that I requested. And that brings back a whole load of like really interesting, new ways of doing business. Because one of the biggest like barriers is the fact that I've got to get my credit card out to pay you. And in doing so, it's not economical for payments less than say $5, right? Because of the charges on the credit card, you're going to get charged 30 cents or 2.5% or whatever it is, right, on the transaction. So you're not going to do that. But if I can pay for every single cat video I see and pay a tiny fraction, I'm going to be fine with that, because it's no hassle to me to do so, right? And if it's a standardized thing, then it's not a case of, okay, I've got to pay for this newspaper, and now I've got to pay for this newspaper and this news website and this comic site and this Netflix, site and this streaming site and this, right? If it's one standard, then I just have one account and my browser just pays wherever I go, just pays them however much I've determined. And maybe there's some negotiation that happens, right? And I've said to my browser, well, don't pay that service more than this amount. And that service comes back and go, okay, well, that's fine. Well, we'll just give you the low res version, right? And things can start effectively paying on your behalf, right? You turn up with a laptop at a foreign airport, and the first thing that pops up is the Wi-Fi thing, right? And it says, pay $6 for 24 hours worth of Wi-Fi, right? Now, what if you're and again, to do that, you've got to supply a username and a password and a credit card and just to get Wi-Fi. Now, what if your web browser, your computer, when you turn up at the airport goes, oh, there's Wi-Fi. Okay, I'll just start paying for you. And because the Wi-Fi service receives the payment, they don't care who you are. They've got payment, right? You've sent them the payment, and they can just go on. So that's a whole area where XRP is being used in this whole notion of micropayments. And there's a project at the moment between Coil, Creative Commons, and Mozilla to do a big kind of like showcase of this and see, okay, what can we do with streaming payments in this way?
Yeah, super cool. And I know as we look to the future, micropayments are going to be huge, and microservices, like, for example, not paying for 24 hours of Wi-Fi, but maybe you only need 15 minutes. And
maybe pay per second, literally.
Yeah,
you can be paying per byte or per second or whatever. And that then brings about this whole new way of doing things, because you don't have to pay for that huge amount, right? And then when you look at things like, okay, we have, I don't know, whatever, like smart electricity grids, right? What if my electric car negotiates with my neighbor's house, right, to sell some excess electricity because I haven't driven today and he's running his washing machine tonight, right? All of these kind of like really interesting things that you can do when you can start streaming these tiny little payments very cheaply and very efficiently. And there's a lot of other tokens that are looking to do that specifically. That like IOTA and stuff like that, they're looking for that market specifically. But things like XRP, they're doing that right now, right? They're doing this streaming micropayments right now, and they don't need a specialized token, right? XRP is a payment token. That's all you need to do, right?
Yeah, super cool. And I know, mentioning cars, I've heard something recently that, there's an opportunity for micro insurance. So like you step into a car, let's say an Uber, and your phone is GPS enabled. So once you're inside the car, immediately the clock starts ticking and you're paying for car insurance as a passenger. You take a 10-minute car ride, 10 minutes is up, you stop paying, and so forth. And like there are so many opportunities for these micropayments, microservices, smart technology, things that operate seamlessly in the background. Internet of Things, the world that is going to be built, that is already being built right now, is so exciting to
Yeah.
me. And it's, who
Yeah.
knows what the winners are going to be. They're going to be thousands, tens of thousands of companies and tokens and things on the back end, and as well as things that are front facing that users know that they have.
Yeah.
It's so hard to see what the world is going to be like, but it's going to be awesome.
Well, exactly. But I mean, even things like payment, like your wages, right? Okay, so you might be paid once a month, or maybe once a week, or maybe even once a day, right? But you're paid at a certain rate. Well, what if actually your payment, your wages are streamed live effectively to your bank account per second as you are at work or as you are working? And so it's not a case of I've got to wait for payday. It's literally as I am doing whatever it is I do to add value to the customer or to society or whatever, the payment is coming down. And you start getting into things like, loans. Well, you could start doing a loan for, not take out a loan for a month or a year or a week, but you could take out a loan for half a second, right? To bridge between two contracts or something. It's quite amazing what could then happen.
Yeah, and what's super cool is that a lot of these services, since they're 100% digital, they can be they can be owned and operated by digital entities, not human beings in the physical world,
Yeah.
but just
Yeah.
smart algorithms, smart companies, and that's a whole other can of worms. Maybe we can talk about another day, but it's really, really exciting what's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's just get back to XRP quickly. Is there any major misconception with XRP or Ripple that you want to just clarify that we haven't already touched on?
I think I've talked about most of them. There's the misconception that XRP is intrinsically to do with banks. I think that's one that's I think we've covered that. People think that it's a centralized network, that it's controlled by Ripple, which is also false. Ripple control about 1% of the nodes on the network. So in some regards, actually, the XRP ledger is more decentralized than the Bitcoin network. Because for Bitcoin, for example, to attack Bitcoin, if you were to do a 51% attack on Bitcoin, well, there's 3 or 4 entities in China that control at least, indirectly, at least 51% of the hash rate through being a mining pool, right? Well, within the XRP ledger, that, it's much more spread out than that. So you would have to, it's not 3 or 4 entities in China you'd have to compromise, but about 28 across the globe. So yeah, there's, like I said, there's a misconception about the use of XRP. There's a misconception about the centralization of the network. Like I said, some people don't like the fact that there was effectively what they call a pre-mine, and that all of the XRP was given to one entity at the start. But again, depending on how far you want to go into this kind of stuff, well, Bitcoin was created by one person or one group of people, however you define Satoshi, and they define the rules, right? So what difference is it? You've decided that you are going to play along by those rules by being a part of the network and being a part of the ecosystem and the economy and everything, but they decided them, right? And people are like, oh, well, you could just create your own token. Well, yes, you could, go for it, but it's not going to be worth anything unless you can add value to it, right? So, sorry, my dog is trying to eat my hand. That's why she's occasionally barking. She's jumping up and down behind me here at the moment. So I'm trying to sort of placate her with one hand while I'm talking.
No problem. I heard some barking, but
Yeah.
that's okay. Awesome. So I got just a couple more questions before I let you go. One major question I think a lot of people would like to know, what are you holding in your portfolio at the moment? Obviously, you've got XRP. Do you want to share how you're kind of positioning yourself, especially in the chaos of the global financial system right now? What are you holding, either cryptocurrency or otherwise, if you want to go that far?
Majority is XRP, as that's probably not a surprise. I hold a small amount of Bitcoin, and at the moment, that's about it. I did have a fairly diverse portfolio. I actually wrote a program that allows you to create a balanced portfolio, and as the relative values go up and down, it will buy and sell between different ones. You could say, okay, I want whatever. I want to hold 25% XRP, 25% Bitcoin, 25% Ethereum, and 25% cash. and then as the values go up, it'll buy and sell between them. So I wrote like a balancing tool to do that and ran that for quite some time. So, but at this exact moment, it's mostly XRP, like I said, a little bit of Bitcoin in there. In terms of other investments, nothing in particular. Like I said, I've the cryptocurrency trading bot that I wrote originally, I've spent a lot of time doing stuff with that, and building various trading bots using machine learning to try and spot patterns, and look at sort of opportunities. And the most recent one I was looking at, until it all went completely crazy, was oil last month. But actually looking at effectively arbitrage between the US and the UK oil prices, pairs trading between the two of them. So yeah, I've been looking at other sort of investments, but basically taking what I've learned from writing trading algorithms for cryptocurrencies and trying to apply them to other assets. I got a bit of a shock when I first started doing it and testing it, and it's like, well, what do you mean you shut the weekend? It's like, what do you mean you can't buy this asset right now because the market is shut, right? Cryptocurrency is not shut, damn it. And it's sort of a bit of a rude awakening that the currency FX market shuts at the weekend, and the oil market, that you're actually trading contracts each month and they come. Yeah, some of that's a bit of a shock.
Yeah, it's crazy. And for folks who don't know, who maybe aren't up on the oil market, recently, I'm losing track of the time, but I think it was about a month ago, the oil price of a 30-day contract went negative. So it was around $18 to start the day, and people think, oh, it might go to 17, might go to 19. It went below zero. It lost more than 100% in a day. I think it went as far as negative 40 or something like that.
About that, yeah, negative 30, negative 40, something around that.
Oh man, yeah. So you think you can't lose more than 100%? Well, if you're in futures contracts, you can.
Oh yeah. I've been running cryptocurrency trading bots on Binance futures as well, and that's been an interesting one. It's quite easy to lose money when you go leverage trading. Yeah. I had something that seemed to be working really well, and I got a bit cocky and put the leverage up a bit higher. I was like, okay, we'll start to 1 to 20, we'll go to 1 to 30. It's like, oh, this is going well, 1 to 50, and then suddenly, boom, everything all went bad. And I had like $100 in there or something. Okay. I was testing it with, but still, yeah, that was a lesson learned.
Yeah. Start small. Don't invest what you can't afford to lose. A lot of basic advice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, you've got a lot of great content, and I know you said you've got some websites and blogs and things. And of course, we met on Twitter, and you're very active on Twitter. You're knocking on the door of 10,000 followers.
Yeah, it's been really funny actually. I got up to about 9,500, and then it just sat there. It sat there for like, I don't know, last 2 years or something, about 9,500. And it's
what
I think the thing being is that I as you know, I'm very outspoken on Twitter, and I think I piss off as many people as people find my information useful. So especially if I get onto like a combination of politics and cryptocurrency, and then things can get a bit heated on there. But I'm on Twitter, Hammertoe. Nothing to do with my feet. It's actually a phonetic corruption of my surname, Hamilton, that happened. And strangely, nobody takes it on any social media platforms. So I'm Hammertoe everywhere. I have been for like 30 years or something, right?
Amazing.
So, yeah.
I was wondering where Hammertoe came from. I was trying to think about it, and I have no idea, but I did not come up with Hamilton. So
yeah. So what happened was I originally I worked for an internet service provider in Albany, New York, for a year or two, and my username was M Hamilton, M Hamilton, and that's 9 characters. And they upgraded the operating system from BSDI to Sonos, and Sonos truncates at 8 characters, so it became M Hamilton. And that just then phonetically became Mr. Hammertoe. And one of the guys would just yell, "Hey, hammer time," whenever I walked in, right? And it just became Hammertoe, and it just kind of stuck. And like I said, it's handy that it's never taken anywhere, but everybody kind of thinks I've got some strange feet or something. But I just stick with that. So I'm Hammertoe, and I'm now officially Hammertoe IBM.com now as well. I just set that up. So
wow.
you can actually reach me directly there as well. So.
Amazing, amazing. And do you have websites that people can check out, like blog?
Yeah. Well, easiest is just find me on Twitter, and it's mostly listed on there. So Hamato on Twitter. I'm on coil.com /u/Hamato. You can find me on there as well. Every Tuesday I stream on the IBM Developer Twitch channel, so twitch.tv/IBM Developer, and I do a lot of stuff about data science and Python and machine learning on there. So you can find me on there kind of every week. I'm live streaming on there as well. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. And final question to some of the listeners who haven't really dipped their toes into cryptocurrency, who might be thinking about it, because I talk about it all the time, so they hear it from me constantly. As you and I both know, the whole cryptocurrency space is full of angst, let's say. A lot of love, a lot of hate, a lot of tough stuff. So what advice would you give to people who want to start learning about cryptocurrencies but start to get overwhelmed, either if they're not a technical person, they don't know where to look, it's hard to get reliable information, and they just are generally feeling a sense of intimidation, and they want to put it off? What advice would you give those people for how to get started comfortably?
Oh, that's a hard one, because like you said, there's so much misinformation out there, and so many people out there. Pretty much everybody's got an agenda of some kind or another, or trying to sell something or whatever. So it is very difficult, and there is a lot of misleading information. I mean, I actually started a YouTube channel called Cryptocurrency Explained, and I started to do I did a weekly show for about a year. If you look on YouTube for Cryptocurrency Explained, you'll find it there as well. And I try to explain to people, okay, how do blockchains work? The idea was you're at your family barbecue, and your uncle or aunt or somebody asks you, oh, what's this, Bitcoin stuff, right? Well, it's internet money. Well, how's it work? Right. And so the idea was to be able to help people be able to understand to a point where somebody who's non-technical could understand it enough to explain it to somebody else who's non-technical, right? And so I kind of started that to fill that void. Unfortunately, I've not had time I ran it for a while and then had to stop it for personal reasons. I ran out. I lost the space where I used to film it. So I need to start it again. That's one place to look. Beyond that, it's hard to say. Just take as many different opinions as you can in, look around. If somebody's, getting very aggressive about something or whatever, then, step back or start listening to somebody else. I would probably say if anybody uses the word shitcoin, I would say look away somewhere else, because that generally means that, they've got a strong opinion on something, and that's possibly clouding their view. Look around.
Yeah, that's good advice. I know when I start to see and feel the emotions of people flying by, if it doesn't feel like genuine enthusiasm for the future, then I try to stay very guarded, I guess, against that. Yeah. Whether it's like blind optimism is a little different than sort of a genuine enthusiasm, I would say.
Yeah, look to people that are building things, right? Look to people that are actually building things rather than just investing, right? Because they're the people that know the actual nuts and bolts of what's going on and how things work.
Yeah, I like it. Perfect. Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Great. Good chatting to you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.